Hey there, so this is Moni with Feng Shui for Us. I want to share with you the story of how I arrived at linking my business with the reforestation of this zone in the Ecuadorian highlands that are the only habitat in the whole world for the black-breasted pavley, is the name of this hummingbird. So the way this happened is that when we moved into this property that we live in Tennessee today, when we first moved about 15 years ago, there was a peach tree in the yard. And unfortunately, when we got here, the peach tree already had a plague. It's a boring plague. It's a little worm that gets in the trunk. And it was already too spread when we got here. We didn't notice in the beginning because it's a very insidious thing that happens inside the trunk of the tree. When we got our first harvest of peaches, we noticed the inside of the pit was hollow and it was full of this goo, which meant that the boring insects had started eating the pits. And so we did everything that we could do to save the tree, but the illness was too advanced. And the only way to save the tree was to poison the tree to a degree that you could not eat the fruit for the next 10 or 15 years. So the tree was suffering and we decided to cut it down. In my Feng Shui business, because trees and forests are connected with wealth, I recommend that people plant 4 trees for every tree they have to cut down. So I always discourage people from cutting down trees, but if it's a necessity that you have to cut down a tree, then I recommend they plant 4 trees for every one they cut. But our property is not very big and we already have 2 really large red maples. So there wasn't a possibility for us to plant another 4 trees. We did plant a magnolia tree where the peach tree used to be, but we couldn't plant 4 trees. And so I started looking for alternatives to plant trees. Now, why the number 4, right? The number 4 is associated with wealth in Feng Shui, is the symbolic number for wealth. So you can think about it like the 4 walls of the basic house. And the house is the most important piece of property that most people are going to have. And it's a representation of wealth. And so I was looking for alternatives, and it's really tricky because there's a lot of nonprofits that offer that they're going to plant trees for you. But a lot of these people, they just spread the seeds and they don't even dig up holes, and they just hope some seeds are going to take. And there's other groups that they'll plant a tree somewhere in a forest and they never go back to check on it. So I wanted something that was more reliable. And one of my friends in Ecuador, who was my friend from high school and elementary school, she was involved in a project of protecting this habitat that I have mentioned, that is the home of the black-breasted pavley. And so because I respect her and trust her, and because it's in my country, very close to where I was born, I decided this was going to be the project that I supported. Because they don't just plant the trees, but they baby the tree until the tree is 3 or 4 years old. And so they take care of that tree until the tree can take care of itself, basically. And this is super important because this is in the highlands. In the highlands, you know, there can be freezes. And even though it's Ecuador, you can have freezes because it's the highlands. And so you have to really take care of the trees. And this foundation that we have become associated with, for $5, they will plant a tree and take for you and take care of it for the first 3 or 4 years. And so this is a really good match for me. But here's the interesting thing, and I think here's where it connects deeper to my why. The peach tree in our property, it was on the exact point that in Feng Shui is associated with health, family, and community. And I came from a very dysfunctional nuclear home. And I remember there was an incident of verbal abuse from my father to me that lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of being insulted and berated. And it was around peaches. My father was upset because I would not eat a peach. And the reason I didn't want to eat the peach was that I had eaten something at lunch that I wasn't used to, or dinner, I don't remember. And I was feeling sick to my stomach. And then my father told me that I needed to eat even if it was a small piece of peach. And I told him I seriously cannot have a mouthful of anything because I feel like I'm going to throw up any moment. And I was really sick. And then he told me that I needed to humor him and eat a tiny piece of peach to prove to him that the family was more important to me than myself, that I wasn't selfish. And I said no because I was really sick and I didn't want to puke. And so he for 2 weeks he worked himself up, and then 2 weeks later there was this episode of verbal abuse that was really terrible. So when we bought this home and I saw there was a peach tree in the health, family, and community portion of our property, I thought this peach tree is going to be healing to me. And when we first harvested the peaches, just a few months after we had moved, the peaches were just delicious. I can't describe how delicious they were, peaches that you just picked up from your yard. But they had this problem with the pits that we noticed right away. And then the harvest got worse and worse every year. And when we finally decided to cut the tree, it was very painful. But to me, it was a representation that sometimes you just have to let things go. You cannot fix relationships when the other person is not interested in fixing that relationship. There cannot be a reconciliation with the person who has abused you if that person is not interested in creating a healthy relationship with you. And so that helped me understand that sometimes you just have to let go. And of course, as the child of your parents, as a relative of anybody, anybody in your family, you want to fix things. You want to have good relationships. You want to resolve things. But it's not always possible to resolve it with that person. But you can resolve it within yourself. Even if the other person is not willing to have a good relationship, you can let go and you can forgive and you can heal from the things that have happened. But sometimes that healing means that you have to cut something off, like we had to cut off that tree. And it was really interesting because we went to a store and we bought a saw, and the boys and I, they were still children back then, I taught them how to use a saw, and they sawed the smaller pieces and I sawed the bigger pieces. And then I was thinking, what are we going to do with the stump? I didn't know what to do with the stump. When we were cutting the last branches of the tree, a couple went by on a truck. And they said, do you need that stump taken care of? And I said, yes. And they said, we'll do it for $30. So they did it for $30, which is really inexpensive. And so I also took that as a sign, it was the universe confirming that it was the right thing to do. Now I see that my connection with planting trees has also to do, with this family history of abuse and the healing that came from it, and how I help people heal from the outside in. Most healing is from the inside out, but Feng Shui is from the outside in, where you work on the space in order to heal the soul. So I can see that connection. And this, why this hummingbird? There's over 120 species of hummingbirds in Ecuador. And so this little hummingbird, probably because it was presented to me, and I think that has some meaning. When I was seeking for a place to pay what I call the tree karma, of having to cut off the one tree, and I wanted to plant at least 4 trees for that, but also pay my tree karma from all the trees that were cut to build our house, from all the trees that are cut every year so that we can have books and things like that. When I was seeking for this was presented to me, the situation of this hummingbird. I think there's 300 of them left, so it's a dire situation. And it's a very resilient type of hummingbird because it lives high in the mountains. This is the city where I was born is over 9,000 feet above sea level, and the habitat of this hummingbird is even higher. And so in order to survive, it has developed these little pants, these little feather pants around its legs. And in Spanish, it's called the samarrito pechinegro, because the samarro is this pants made of hide that the cowboys in the highlands of the Andes Mountains, the indigenous cowboys, not really cowboys, you know, I don't know what you would call them, but the indigenous people that had herds of llamas and other animals in the highlands, they made these pants made of fur or hides to surround their feet so they wouldn't freeze in the really cold weather up in the Andes Mountains. And so this little bird, it looks like it has little pants. It's the cutest thing. And so I think, because I like the bird, I like the hummingbird because of the resilience, because it's just terribly cute, and because it's a highland being, it's a mountain being, like I'm a mountain person. And also the representation, the original forest, it was raised in order to plant grass and have cattle graze there. And I think this act, just cutting off forest is kind of a bullying act. And so the restoration is healing. Restoring the forest is healing. Trees, forests, in feng shui, they are connected with wealth, but they're also connected to health and family. They both share many things together. And so the restoration of the forest is a healing process for the forest, for every being in the forest, and for me. And I also contribute every month. I have planted over 5,000 trees and bushes. The trees, because they are the holders of the habitat, and the bushes because they provide the flowers that are the food for the hummingbirds. And so I have planted over 5,000, a combination of trees and bushes. And I contribute every month to plant more trees, and I also contribute money to help the indigenous people that help plant the trees. And so it's a project that is very dear to me because of all these reasons, and I think that it can be healing for a lot of people. And I also see, like the bullies, people who are bullies, they are just trying to meet their own needs. And unfortunately, a bully is a person that believes that in order to meet their own needs, they have to abuse others, they have to take advantage of others, they have to disrespect all the life around them. But that can be healed, that can be restored. And so it's part of my healing process, and I think it can bring happiness and joy to a lot of people to get involved with a project that is so important. The Ecuador is so important, not because it's my country, because it's on the equator, where it should be hot, right? But it has two chains of the Andes Mountains going through it. And so there's these knots of hills and mountains that join these two chains. So it's like this, let me show you here. So if this was Ecuador, there's two chains of mountains going from north to south, and then there's knots joining those chains of mountains, and each of those connections, like rungs of a ladder, creates a different microclimate. And with all different types of altitudes, there's just like nothing you can't grow in Ecuador. Ecuador has the highest biodiversity of the whole planet. And so when a forest is lost, it's not just the hummingbirds, it's a lot of other species that are at risk. And one reason we focus on the hummingbird is because it's cute and people can relate to it, and people love hummingbirds. And I also connect to hummingbirds because in feng shui we talk about connecting heaven and earth. And the function of the human being is to connect heaven and earth. What you do is you get inspiration or ideas from heaven, you process them through your emotions to get motivated to action in the physical plane. That is the function of the human being. We only feel happy when we do that, basically. And so the hummingbird is considered to be a messenger from heaven, is considered to be a messenger from the spirit world. So I like to think of hummingbirds, as like that inspiration, that idea coming to you. And then you can motivate yourself and turn those ideas into action to create heaven on earth.